Hi, welcome to Whiteboard Analysis, a podcast where I talk about things on my board. Today, we'll be talking about Scientology. If you haven't been here before, here are the rules. 1, do your own research. 2, form your own opinion. And 3, any information provided by me is gathered from a cited source that I will list in the description below. Anything I say in this video does not represent my personal opinion, and it is all allegedly. This video will be mainly about the rise of L. Ron Hubbard, who is the creator of Scientology. My second video will likely be about the beliefs of Scientology, what it's like being in Scientology, what it's like being in the Sea Org. And my third video will likely be about the current leader, David Miscavige, as well as his daughter's experience, Jen Miscavige. Some content warnings for this video include descriptions of domestic violence, child abuse, SA, religious abuse, self-exit, kidnapping, racism, and graphic descriptions of abuse tactics. Please watch with care. If you're not able to watch today, that is totally okay, and I hope to see you in the next one. For this video, I've been reading Going Clear by Lawrence Wright. He is a fantastic author. He wrote The Looming Tower, which is about 9/11 and Al-Qaeda. As you can see, I'm not even halfway through. This book is packed with information. I took a lot of notes. Everything he referenced is in the back of the book. Highly recommend Lawrence Wright. For this video, I also have been reading Inside Scientology. I won't be referencing this one as much, but it is a very well-written book as well. And for my third video, I will be reading Beyond Belief, which is by Jen Miscavige, who is David Miscavige's daughter. I will also be providing sources from Scientologists that go against some of these works. Any of the information in this video is not from those sources, but I will present them in the description below in case you're interested in reading more about that. I would also like to level set that no, I'm not a Scientologist. I am an atheist, and no, no one is paying me to do this. I just genuinely enjoy reading about different religions and different beliefs and would like to share this information online. Did I miss anything? I think that's it. So with that, let's get started. So to start off, L. Ron Hubbard, or Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, was born on March 13th, 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska. He was born to his father, Harry Ross Hubbard, and his mother, Ladora May Hubbard. Most of Ron's family at this time, they were Methodists and devout Christians. I'm going to quote this over here. Hubbard boasted that at 3.5 years old, he was riding broncs, reading, and soon devouring shelves of classics, including much of Western philosophy, pillars of English literature, and of note, the essays of Sigmund Freud. When Ron was 6 years old, in 1917, his father goes to war and enters World War I. In 1918, the war was about over, and L. Ron's family became kind of a military family because his father became a career Navyman. I just put the ages here if that's helpful. Throughout his youth, Ron was fascinated by shamans and magicians. He said he was made a blood brother of Blackfoot Native Americans, and he said he was made a blood brother by a man named Old Tom Madfeathers. And he said that Old Tom would leap 15 feet into the air, perch on top of his teepee, do all this crazy stuff. When Ron was 12, he took a 7,000-mile voyage to visit his father. His father was stationed in Washington, D.C., and so he took a boat from Seattle through the Panama Canal to Washington, D.C., so all the way around the United States. On this voyage was a passenger, Joseph C. Snake Thompson, who was in the U.S. Navy Medical Corps. He allegedly was a personal friend of Sigmund Freud's and made a really big impact on Ron. Allegedly, Joseph Snake posed as a herpetologist or snake scientist in Asia, and that's why he spoke fluent Japanese. In a naval bulletin, Thompson wrote a review of psychoanalytic literature that stated, and I'm going to paraphrase this here, once the patient understands the motives behind his neurotic behavior, his symptoms automatically disappear. I want you to keep that in your brain for later. In the spring of 1927, when Ron was 16 years old, he made another voyage to visit his parents. The voyage went from San Francisco to Guam. According to Lawrence Wright, that trip was organized by the YMCA and only lasted about 10 days. According to L. Ron Hubbard, he allegedly made a pit stop to China where he studied different religions. He said that he studied more Eastern religions after he met some holy men. He apparently watched monks meditating for weeks on end, but again, according to one of the records that L. Ron wrote about in a journal, this lasted only about 10 days. His parents also allegedly accompanied him, even though this was said to be a trip to visit his parents, but L. Ron didn't really write about them in his journal. When Ron was 19 in 1930, on May 1st, he enlists in the Marine Corps Reserves. He allegedly lied about his age when he signed up, and he backdated his birth date about 2 years because he wanted to have a leg up on his peers so that he would have a better chance at being a higher position like sergeant. Official military records state that he was in active duty at this time, aside from being active during his training period. In the fall of that same year, L. Ron entered George Washington University in the School of Engineering. He was allegedly a kind of poor student. He failed German and calculus, but really excelled at extracurricular activities. He wrote for a school newspaper. He became the director of a gliding club, which was very new at the time. On October 22nd of 1931, Ron requested to be discharged from the Marine Corps. Quote, "I do not have the time to devote to the welfare of the regiment," and he was honorably discharged. His discharge paperwork has some notes that says he's not to be re-enlisted, which effectively bans him from ever rejoining the Marine Corps again. Now, a lot of people know that L. Ron was a very big writer in his time. His first published story was January of 1932. So at the time, he was 21. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, in 2006, he's published more books than any other author, with 1,084 titles. In the spring of 1932, L. Ron decides he wants to go on an adventure, and he wants to bring a bunch of people, so he posts a notice at his own and a couple local universities saying he's looking for young men with wanderlust who want to go on an adventure. They must be fit, they must be healthy, they have to be resourceful and adventurous, dependable, imaginative. He called this project the Caribbean Motion Picture Expedition because he wanted to film some newsreels of some haunted areas, like pirate areas. But most of all, he wanted to collect whatever one gathers to display in a museum, whatever that means. He couldn't afford to charter a boat, so what did he do? He told all of the students on the notice that, hey, if you come to this dock in Baltimore, you just have to pay $250 to get on board. Keep in mind, this was during the height of the Great Depression. The equivalent of $250 in today's dollars is over 6,000 US dollars. So he's asking each and every one of these people who are in the Great Depression, they are students, they likely don't have a job, or if they do, it doesn't pay that much, to front $6,000 to get on a ship where they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know where they're going. A lot of the men who signed up, they ended up bailing last minute. And the boat, due to lack of wind, was kind of stuck in the Baltimore Bay. And to get the boat out, they had to have another boat pull it out. But that boat that they had chartered had a rope attached to the dock. The voyage kind of just got worse for those who showed up. There was no meat or fruit, a lot of seasickness, and at each port, more and more people were getting off. He ended up not having enough money to pay the professional sailors on the boat. And the captain, who was furious, said, "We're going back to Baltimore." Hubbard describes this as a glorious adventure. Scientology describes this as a successful 5,000-mile voyage. Who knows what happened? What we do know is that L. Ron didn't show up at the port. He wasn't at the port when they docked back in Baltimore. He was in Puerto Rico, so he kind of fled. And I want you to remember this event because this idea of him gathering a bunch of followers and taking them on an adventure or out to sea becomes a common thing that he repeats throughout his life. In 1933, L. Ron marries Margaret Louise Grubb, also known as Polly. If I refer to Polly, I'm referring to his first wife. They settled in Maryland in a small town near her family's farm, and Ron, to make money, decides he's going to start writing pulp fiction. Now, if you didn't know, pulp fiction was popular in the Great Depression. It was rare for writers that were unknown to get well known because these works were written on cheap paper stock. And most people during this time of the Great Depression weren't able to afford a hard copy or a regular paper copy of something. And it allowed these authors to explore new genres. The unfortunate thing is the pay for contributions is just a penny per word. So that meant to make a living off this, you needed to write really, really fast. And that's just what Ron did. The church, during the years of 1934 and 1936, estimates that L. Ron Hubbard was churning out hundreds of thousands of words per month. It's said that Ron wrote so fast that he would perspire when he wrote. which is just really interesting. To write this quickly, he said that he would he would write while watching a movie in his brain. He would just write down what he saw in his brain and basically would do a first draft, edit it, and then send it out. So not reviewing it more than like one time. Now, Ron and Polly's relationship seemed to be going well because they ended up having their first couple of children. Ron's son, L. Ron Jr., was born May 7th, 1934, and Ron's first daughter, Kathleen May, was born January 15th of 1936, when Ron was 23 and 25, respectively. As his children were growing up, he was still really into writing these pulp fictions, exploring his creativity, becoming really imaginative. He decided to set his sights on Hollywood. He decided to go to New York frequently so that he could start making professional connections in the industry, but that meant that he was leaving his wife and children alone most of the time. He started to reach out to studios in Hollywood, sending them his works and saying, "I would love you to make this a movie or a TV show." In the spring of 1937, Hubbard made what he thought was his big break. Columbia Pictures picked up his title called The Secret of Treasure Island, and he very quickly moved to Hollywood, leaving his wife and children back in Washington. But the summer of this same year, Ron came back to Washington State to see his family, and he said he didn't want to do this project anymore because, and I quote, he blamed long hours, some tension with producers and writers and editors, and quote-unquote dumb Jew producers. So he went back to writing these pulp fictions that he was doing before. Now here is where the start of his Scientology thinking began. In 1938, Hubbard had what I'm going to call the revelation. He underwent a dental operation, and while he was under anesthesia, he believes that he passed. When he passed on, he said he believed the secrets of the universe were then revealed to him. I'm going to quote this over here. This is from Going Clear. Hubbard's literary agent said that Hubbard said that he had risen from the dental chair in spirit form, glanced back at his former body, and wondered, where do we go from here? His spirit then noticed a huge ornate gate which he floated through. On the other side was an intellectual smorgasbord of everything that had ever puzzled the mind of man. How did it all begin? Where do we go from here? Are there past lives? And like a sponge, he was absorbing all of this esoteric information. All of a sudden, he felt himself being pulled back. He opened his eyes and said to the nurse, "I was dead, wasn't I?" The nurse looked startled, and the doctor gave her a dirty look for letting him know what happened. And when Ron came to, he believed that he was still in contact or connection with something. Now, I know a lot of people do have experiences when they pass on and come back, but I just want you to keep in mind that so far what we know of Ron is that he's a very imaginative person. He's someone who fibs quite a bit. Now, while he was in this days of the revelation, he decided to write a book called Excalibur, which didn't really get published, but he did end up using some of its contents later in Scientology. In that same year, 1938, Hubbard began writing for a magazine called Astounding Science Fiction, whom the editor of that magazine believes that science fiction amounted to prophecy. Again, I just want you to keep in mind, L. Ron really seems to gather a lot of his beliefs from the people around him. Between 1938 and 1950, it's estimated that Ron wrote about 35 pieces for Astounding Science Fiction, many of which contained a lot of his ideas that he then used in Scientology. To continue writing for this paper, Ron decided he needed to move to New York. Again, his children and his wife are still in Washington State. And during this time is when it's suspected that he began to start having affairs with other women and blamed his wife for it. He wrote in a journal, which Scientologists dispute now. He said, because of his wife's coldness, physically, the falsity of her pretensions, I believed myself a near eunuch. Polly found out and they didn't speak for some time, but they did reconcile in 1940. After they reconciled, they decided to go on an Alaskan cruise, and it ended up being a 6-month-long journey, which his children weren't a part of. So Polly and Ron were gone from their children for about 6 months. And Ron's friends at the time said that this boat would be too small for that long of a voyage, and it's believed that he might have continued the voyage to prove them wrong. In 1941, Ron attempted to join the US Navy, and in April of that year, he failed his physical due to poor eyesight. In July of that same year, President Roosevelt declared a national emergency and his physical ailments were ignored. So he joined the US Naval Reserve as a lieutenant. Ron states that he was aboard the USS Edsall around August of that year, and he said that the ship sank around the time of when Pearl Harbor happened, which was December of that same year. He said that everyone on the ship perished except for him and that he escaped into the jungle, but that ship didn't actually sink until the following year. Ron said that while he was in this jungle after he escaped the ship sinking, that he was hunted down by Japanese soldiers. And at this time, he stated he was on the coast of Java, and he said that he created a raft and sailed to Australia. This raft expedition from Java to Australia would be extremely difficult, to say the least. The shortest distance between Java and Australia is about 186 nautical miles, which is about 215 regular miles in the Indian Ocean, which the Indian Ocean, if you don't know, has some pretty strong currents. I'm going to show a map over here of the current flow. There is a man who successfully built a primitive raft and sailed from east of Java to Australia, which took him about 13 days. So it is possible. It's just unlikely because the ship didn't sink until 1942. Maybe perhaps his time was mixed up, you were in the middle of war, I have no idea, but it seems a quite unlikely story. According to Navy records, however, Hubbard was training as an intelligence officer in New York when the war began. He was supposed to be stationed at the Philippines during the war, but his ship got diverted to Australia because of the overwhelming Japanese ships surrounding the Pacific. Aboard this ship apparently was a naval attaché, which is basically a specialized diplomatic officer. And I'm going to quote what that officer apparently said about Ron. He said that this officer is not satisfactory for independent duty assignment. He is garrulous and tries to give impressions of his importance, and apparently sent Hubbard back to the US for further assignment. Now, after he gets back from this ship, he's back in America, they want to give him a second chance. So he was given an opportunity to command another ship. According to naval records, he was relieved of command before the ship even left the dock. And this is because the commandant of the Boston Navy Yard stated he is not temperamentally fitted for independent command. During the war, Hubbard had a really severe case of conjunctivitis, which is inflammation of your eyeball. It's very red, it's very itchy, doesn't feel good. But he told his fellow servicemen that he was injured by a muzzle flash. So the bright light that comes out of a muzzle or a gun when it goes off, he says that's why he has such poor eyesight. But really, it was a very severe case of conjunctivitis. He also contracted gonorrhea from a woman he described as a, quote, loose person. In 1943, he was given another chance to command a ship. He was given the USS PC-815, which is a submarine. Now, during his training to become a naval lieutenant, Hubbard was described as one of the lowest in his class when it came to reading radar or sonar signals. And while he was on the ship, he believed he picked up on the sonar another submarine, and he began to fire at that submarine. After 68 hours of attacking said submarine, Ron told his officers that he defeated it. He claimed he successfully sank at least one enemy sub. He was ordered to return to port. An official investigation from the Navy determined that there were no submarines in the area, and no Japanese records indicate that there were submarines in the area as well. The church, however, believes that there definitely was something there and that he definitely did defeat that submarine. Right after this incident, he fired at an ally by accident and was immediately relieved of his command. On April 9th of 1945, Ron was hospitalized for stomach pains, and it was during this hospitalization that he came up with some of his techniques that he would later use in Scientology, specifically in the book Dianetics. Ron boasts that he healed himself of his traumatic injuries during this time, the method, which I will tell you later. There's no evidence of any doctor's notes, x-rays, examinations, any medical documentation that states that L. Ron had any injuries during the war. According to Ron, he was also administered a psychiatric evaluation during this time, which apparently the evaluator wrote 2 pages worth of notes and at the end stated, this officer has no neurotic or psychotic tendencies of any kind, but again, there's no evidence that this evaluation occurred. This same year, Ron moves in with some occultists in Southern California. They practice various forms of occult and ritual. It was led by this man named Jack Parsons. Feel free to read more if you're interested. But it said during this time here that he participated in quite a number of rituals and ceremonies. One that was performing the invocation of wand with marital basis on a talisman, aka masturbating onto a piece of paper, and it said that he invoked probably twice a night. The church does admit that Ron was involved with this occultist group, but they say that it was part of a naval intelligence operation, so to get some information on them. Now, while he was living with these occultists, he met a woman named Sara Northrup. In 1946, Ron becomes in active duty. During this time, he's repeatedly asking Sara Northrup to marry him, and eventually she does marry him, but only after he said he would if she didn't. I'd like you to remember that his wife Polly and his children are still back in Washington State, and he was still married to Polly. Polly doesn't find out until a year later when she sees it in the newspaper. In the winter of 1946, Ron hits a low point. Polly doesn't know that Ron has now married Sara. He decides he needs to move into a lighthouse on a frozen lake in Stroudsburg, PA, and he begins to have nightmares at nighttime. He apparently carried a .45 pistol around and fired it randomly. Sara was reasonably scared. Ron was having writer's block. He was up late typing at night while Sara was sleeping, and suddenly, while Sara's asleep, she's hit with the back of a pistol for no reason. And Ron said that he did that because she was smiling in her sleep, and that must mean that she was thinking of somebody else. She got up, she left the house, terrified. She walks out onto the frozen lake. She's in the middle of nowhere. She just kind of stands there, not knowing what to do, and eventually goes back inside. And Sara, being the good wife that she tried to be, she was trying to help Ron through his writer's block, so she began typing stories for him sometimes, or giving him story ideas. While they were at this lighthouse in the middle of nowhere, Ron was threatening suicide. And remember, he's got a .45 pistol. And I'm sure a lot of people are gonna ask, well, why didn't Sara leave? A, she's in the middle of nowhere. B, she moved across the country for this person. Who is she gonna go to? Who's she gonna call? This is also 1946. There's no internet. And at this time, divorce was very taboo. And Sara didn't believe in divorce at that time. Sara and Ron, after this, moved back to Port Orchard, where Ron's children lived. And after meeting Ron's children, this is when Sara finds out that Ron had a first wife, that she's not the first wife. And she found that out through L. Ron Hubbard Jr. She, being reasonably upset, tried to flee. She tried to find a ferry. She was like, I'm leaving, I'm getting out of here. And Ron followed her to the ferry, and he pled that he was going to divorce Polly. So Sara stayed, and they moved to Hollywood. But on their way there, they didn't really get too far because Ron was arrested for not paying for his trailer. Just for your knowledge, Sara stated all this before the end of her life, shortly before she passed. In April of 1947, Polly, Ron's first wife, files for divorce. Now, this is a really big thing at this time. Divorce at this time required certain reasonings, and the reasoning that Polly stated was for desertion and non-support because neither of her children were gathering any child support or income from Ron. In December of this year, the divorce was finalized. I want to note that in October of this year, so before the divorce was finalized, Ron pled to the VA for more money. He also quoted, "My last physician informed me that it might be very helpful if I were to be examined and perhaps tested psychiatrically or even by a psychoanalyst." In the late 1940s, the popular psychiatric treatments of that time were frontal lobotomies, insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, and some Freudian analytics, but mostly the first three. So very aggressive forms of treatment that clearly are not still used today, or if they are, it's absolutely barbaric. There is no record that the VA conducted any such psychoanalytic assessment. I have some undated notes that I also want to include. At some point in 1947, Ron learned how to perform hypnosis. He tried to perform hypnosis on Sara's mother, encouraging her to give him all of her money. When he was caught, he accused Sara of hypnotizing him in his sleep to hypnotize her mother. I just wanted to note some observations that people that have known or worked with L. Ron Hubbard have said, some of which have psychiatric or psychological credentials. Russell Miller, who is a British photographer, tracked down an ex-lover of Hubbard's who described him as a manic depressive with paranoid tendencies. She later became a psychologist. And she added that he said he always wanted to found a religion like Moses or Jesus. I don't know how to pronounce this, but Jim Dincalci, Hubbard's medical officer in the Church of Scientology, listed his traits as paranoid personality, delusions of grandeur, and pathological lying. And Dr. Stephen Wiseman, a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia, speculated that a possible diagnosis of Hubbard's personality would be malignant narcissism, which is a highly insecure individual protecting himself with aggressive grandiosity, disavowal of any and every need from others, antisocial orientation, and a heady and toxic mix of rage, anger, aggression, violence, and paranoia. L. Ron Hubbard's son, L. Ron Jr., later stated that it was his goal to be the most powerful being in the universe. Now, before I get back to the timeline, I just want to talk about Ron's secret memoir. This is a debated piece of work. The church claims that this document is forgery and that Hubbard absolutely did not write this document, but there was a trial that L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology was a part of, and this document was included in that trial. The church's lawyers said that these papers were intensely private, constituting a sort of self-therapy, and did not reflect Hubbard's actual condition. This document, which is often called the affirmations or admissions, is about 30 pages long. So when he's having a hard time, he starts to write this. So the way this document is set up, it's basically split into two parts. Course 1 contains his prescriptive mantras, and Course 2 contains his affirmations or incantations. And I'm going to list out a bunch of them because I think they really reveal his inner thoughts about himself. Some of his prescriptive mantras are, I can write, my mind is still brilliant, masturbation is no sin or crime, I do not need to have ulcers anymore, I'm fortunate in losing Polly and my parents, for they never meant well by me. The numbers 7, 25, and 16 are not unlucky or evil for me. That I am not bad to look upon, that I am not susceptible to colds, that Sara is always beautiful to me. In Course 2, I feel like these kind of reveal his lies. Your eyes are getting progressively better. They became bad when you used them as an excuse to escape the Naval Academy. Your stomach trouble, you used it as an excuse to keep the Navy from punishing you. You are free of the Navy. Testosterone blends easily with your own hormones. You have no fear of what any woman may think of your bed conduct. You know you are a master. You know they will be thrilled. You have no fear if they conceive. What if they do? You do not care. Pour it into them and let fate decide. You can tell all the romantic tales you wish, but you know which ones were lies. You have enough real experience to make anecdotes forever. Stick to your true adventures. Masturbation does not injure or make insane. Your parents were in error. Everyone masturbates. It is not necessary for you to lie to be amusing and witty. You like to have your intimate friends approve of and love you for what you are. This desire to be loved does not amount to a psychosis. Your psychology is advanced and true and wonderful. It hypnotizes people. It predicts their emotions, for you are their ruler. Material things are yours for the asking. Men are your slaves. Self-pity and conceit are not wrong. Your mother was in error. Anyway, I'm gonna stop. I feel like it's really revealing of he knows he lies a lot. He thinks that women don't find him attractive, and he thinks that women don't like him in bed, or he thinks he's not good in bed, or women have told him he's not good in bed. He wants other people to see him as this top guy, this ruler, this master, whatever. And I would describe that as narcissistic statements. I think it really just shows he's like very ashamed of himself. I forgot to mention that there is also a third part that he refers to as the book, which are basically his personal goals. You do not know anger. Your patience is infinite. You do not masturbate. You are psychic. Snakes are not dangerous to you. You did a fine job in the Navy. No one there is now out to get you. It just is so telling. Again, Scientologists dispute that this is made up. They think that someone forged this. This document was included in a trial, which I could talk about in a different video. Back to the timeline. In 1948, this is after Polly files for divorce. This is after Ron learns about hypnosis and tries to hypnotize Sara's mom. Ron goes back to Hollywood and he begins formulating his ideas of what he's gonna write for his next book, which will later be called Dianetics. He said he had been conducting research on inferiority complexes, which is interesting. During this time, he begins to form a sort of disdain for the psychiatric, psychological communities, these doctors that establish their practices. He said he wanted to revolutionize the field because nobody in it, so far as he can tell, knows his anatomy from a gopher hole. And he said that his book would detail the full mathematics of the human mind, solve all the problems of the ages, and give 6 recipes for aphrodisiac, and plays the mouth organ with the left foot. Huh? During this time in Hollywood, he tried to act. He wasn't really satisfied. He tried to get a grant, like the Guggenheim grant, but he didn't get that. He tried to beg his friend for a $50,000 loan. That didn't work out. And during this time, he began to volunteer at a psychiatric clinic. Doing a sort of background check on your clinicians is probably a good idea, because this is not very long after he's like having a really hard time. And that's not to say that clinicians don't struggle with things, but he's not well. This man's not well. He also said during this time he was cruising on 4 hours of sleep every night. Like, let alone the mental state, like, my guy just wasn't sleeping. He claimed that he was getting really phenomenal results on his patients doing his new method that I'm sure his psychiatric clinicians there were not aware of. And multiple science fiction writers that were close to Hubbard in 1948 and 1949 said that Hubbard said, "I'd like to start a religion because that's where the money is." This is highly debated by Scientologists. I'm just sharing this information. I don't know what actually happened. In April of 1949, Ron wrote a note to his friend stating that he was moving to DC. There was no mention of Sara. A month after that, Ron applied for a marriage license to marry a woman named Ann Jensen, who was 26 years old. He was still married to Sara, and the application was canceled the next day at the request of the bride. In the spring of 1950, Ron and Sara moved to New Jersey near John Campbell, who is the editor of Astounding Science Fiction. Ron performed deep hypnoses on John Campbell, and John Campbell says he retrieved traumatic memories from birth, and Hubbard erased them. And Campbell immediately was like, we gotta like make money out of this. This is a great idea. Ron hadn't written Dianetics yet, but this was like, we're at the crux of Dianetics. And on March 8th of 1950, Ron and Sara have a daughter, and her name is Alexis. Now, what's in Dianetics? What's up with Dianetics? This is about when it happens. January 12th of 1950, Ron alleges that he started writing Dianetics. February 10th, he said it was finished. So that's what, less than 30 days, less than a month? And April 25th, he said it was off to the presses. While writing this, Hubbard contacted the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the Gerontological Society of America, and basically saying, I'm writing this book, here's this new method, let me know what you think. But later, like I said, he's beginning to develop this disdain for psychiatry, and he would later denounce them and say they're basically terrorists. I've said a couple times that Ron was influenced by a lot of people. Particularly for Dianetics, he was influenced by one person, Alfred Korzybski, who is a Polish-American philosopher, and he created the theory of general semantics, which is a system of linguistic philosophy designed to improve human understanding and communication. And a quote that he said is, "Words are not things they describe in the same way that a map is not the territory it represents." Korzybski also claimed that a lot of psychosomatic illnesses could be cured by semantic training. From this particular influence, this is how Ron decided that he wanted to create new words to represent ideas in Scientology. For example, Thetan in L. Ron Hubbard's language is basically a soul. Going clear means someone who has eliminated their reactive mind. Let me get into it in just a second, but this is just to say Ron is creating new words to represent things that he believes. All right, a quick crash course on Dianetics. The belief is that there are 2 parts of the mind. One is the analytical/conscious mind. You're in your state of awareness. This is where you form perceptions of your past. You make observations, you think, you problem solve. This is your rational mind, and it's aware of itself. The other part of the mind is the reactive mind. This is where you have nightmares, insecurities, fears. It doesn't think, it's not rational, and it holds on to painful emotions, which L. Ron calls engrams, which are recordings of pain gathered while unconscious, such as sleeping. And he believes that when these engrams are awakened by some sort of external stimuli or trigger, that it seizes control of the conscious mind. Now, Ron believed that these traumas could even be prenatal, like in the womb. He believes that people that have parents that attempted to abort them that they live with this internal unconscious fear that they live with murderers. I don't believe that's true. That's just what L. Ron Hubbard thinks. Ron thinks of these engrams almost like you're being hypnotized, like you're not aware that something is taking over you. Ron says that you can get rid of these engrams by repeatedly going over these painful emotions. Basically, you recite the details of a triggering incident until it no longer bothers you. To Ron's credit, that sounds surprisingly similar to some forms of PTSD therapy, such as EMDR, but it is not backed by the FDA or the Psychiatric Association or any association. The overall goal in Dianetics is to get rid of all these engrams. If you remove the reactive mind, you're now clear. You're now in total control of yourself, and Ron believes that you will gain extra abilities. Ron believes that when you're clear, you have complete recall of everything that's ever happened to you, of everything you've ever studied. And he thinks that you basically do mental computations faster than everybody else. You're better than everybody else. Anyway, that's the gist of Dianetics. The first pages of Dianetics were published in Astounding Science Fiction. Now this is a science fiction magazine. The entry did state, "This article is not a hoax, joke, or anything but a direct, clear statement of a totally new scientific thesis." I don't think all readers knew that those words meant that it wasn't science fiction. Scientologists nowadays start their calendars at 1950. So when Dianetics was published, they're like, that's the start of time, basically. That's when we start counting our calendars. In August of 1950, Hubbard reveals his first clear. So the first person who ever got rid of their reactive mind. This was at a big auditorium in Los Angeles. The woman's name is Sonia Bianca, and this was a physics student from Boston. Ron said that she had a full and perfect recall of her entire life, but when asked questions, Sonia was unable to answer anything. Stuff like, what did you eat 3 weeks ago for breakfast? And she didn't really have an answer. So basically, she didn't have perfect recall and she wasn't clear. After this, Hubbard didn't announce another clear for another 16 years. Now, I didn't mention, but to get rid of these engrams, Hubbard said you had to use a process called auditing, which at this time didn't include an e-meter or the tin cans. The auditor would ask repetitive questions and tried to listen to the person who is being audited or the auditee to see where their memories are going, if there's any blocks. So the auditor had to rely on a lot of intuition to see what they should ask next. Instead of the e-meter, they kind of looked for like physical reactions, the look on your face, how your body was sitting. Is your voice louder? Is it softer? Do you sound angry? This is very similar to, again, how a lot of therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists treat their patients. They do look at their patient and see how are they reacting to this. But these were not professionals and they were guided by L. Ron Hubbard, who does not have a degree in psychology or psychiatry. Now, again, reminder, at this time, it's pretty taboo to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And if you do, and you're not doing well, they're going to give you treatments like a lobotomy. Self-help books were becoming popular at this time. And when Dianetics was published, it became a New York Times bestseller and was on the New York Times bestseller list for the following 28 weeks. And this is in 1950. So this is like post-war, right after the war. A lot of people returning from war, having PTSD, are looking for help that the VA is not able to provide. So they go seeking the help in this new book of this new field of psychology that they haven't seen before. The scientific community's reaction was pretty poor. They ridiculed Hubbard's work. They said it was psychological folk art. Quote, "This volume probably contains more promises and less evidence per page than has any publication since the invention of printing." Erich Fromm, a predominant psychoanalytic thinker at the time, said, "It is expressive of a spirit that is exactly the opposite of Freud's teaching. Hubbard's method has no respect for and no understanding of the complexities of personality." Now, Korzybski, who I mentioned was an influence of Hubbard, the one who influenced him to name souls thetans and memories engrams, they said anyone writing several million words of fantasy and science fiction should ultimately begin to internalize the assumptions underlying the verbiage. He did have some support from some physicians. Campbell, who is, again, the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, his brother-in-law showed a lot of support. His name is Dr. Joseph Winter, And he also wrote for Astounding Science Fiction. And scientists decided to test Hubbard's technique and see what outcomes come from this if it's actually used in therapy. They found that his techniques produced no measurable improvement, and he blamed the scientists for failing to understand his system. So Dianetics is a huge success. Hubbard is now rolling in cash. Hundreds of groups wanting to practice Dianetics sprang up in the US. Now, they didn't call themselves Scientologists, but they were people that wanted to audit each other. To gain more revenue, Ron opened up Dianetics schools or auditing schools in major US cities. I do want to note, because I mentioned it and I forgot to say this, Hubbard made it clear in Dianetics that he was very against abortion, yet L. Ron's son, L. Ron Jr., says that he saw Ron standing over his mother with a coat hanger once, and that Polly wrote, in the 7 times they got pregnant, she had 5 abortions. And while writing Dianetics, Hubbard allegedly kicked Sara in the stomach multiple times to cause a miscarriage. Even after all his success, Ron still continued to abuse Sara. He admitted, "I do not want to be an American husband, for I can buy my friends whenever I want." He wanted a divorce, but he said that divorce would ruin his reputation because it's frowned upon. So he said if Sara loved him, she would kill herself. Sara consulted a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said that Ron should be institutionalized and warned Sara that her life was likely in danger. Sara, after hearing this, takes this information back to Ron. She said that if Ron got treatment, she would stay in the marriage. Ron, in response, threatened to kill their child, Alexis. Sara fled with baby Alexis and went to the LA Dianetics Research Foundation, where she began to have an affair with a man named Miles Hollister. And Ron, when he became aware of this happening, he said that they were plotting to have him put into a mental institution, which perhaps they were, perhaps they weren't. On February 21st of 1951, baby Alexis disappeared. On that night, Sara went to the movies and the baby was in the care of a Dianetics Foundation member. This baby, by the way, was very popular in the Dianetics Foundation because this was, according to Ron, the first Dianetics baby. At 10 p.m. that night, the 11th-month-old Alexis began to cry, and the member taking care of her at the time picked her up. Allegedly, the baby whispered, "Don't sleep." That's fucking terrifying. At 11 p.m., there was a knock on the door. The member opened the door, and at the door was Hubbard's aide, who was wearing a topcoat and had his hand in his pocket. The member thought that the man in the topcoat might have had a gun. The man in the topcoat said that Ron was here to take baby Alexis, and fearful for his life, the member decided to let them take the baby. Later, Sara came back and saw that the baby was gone. She was distraught, didn't know what to do. Not long after, Hubbard came by with 2 other men wanting to abduct Sara, saying, "We have Alexis, and you will never see her alive if you don't come with us right now." Sara says that they tied her hands and dragged her out of bed. Ron had her in a chokehold to keep her from screaming. Ron throws Sara into the car, hands tied. They decide to drive her to a psychiatric hospital, hoping to get her committed, but it was very late in the night, so the psychiatric hospital denied them. At some point during this ride, Sara was able to negotiate a truce with Ron. The truce was that Ron would tell Sara where Alexis was if she signed a note saying she came in this car and went with them of her free will. Sara said, "Fine, great." She signed it. She goes to the location where Ron says her baby's going to be. The baby's not there. She asks the receptionist, "Where's my baby?" And the receptionist says, "Oh, a couple just came in to take her." So Ron decides he's going to fly to Chicago and he wants to get a psychiatric evaluation, another one. His goal is he wants to counter the accusation that he's a paranoid schizophrenic. The psychologist reported that Hubbard was a creative individual who's upset by family problems and depressed about his work. And Hubbard used this often in the future to say that, well, a psychologist told me I was fine. Ron knows, okay, I'm not crazy. They said I'm not crazy. I have proof now. So he calls Sara and says, "I killed baby Alexis." Sara says he said that he cut her into little pieces and dropped the pieces in a river, and that he had seen the arms and legs floating down the river, and that it was Sara's fault. He'd done it because she left him. Meanwhile, the couple that picked up baby Alexis was driving her all the way across the country to give her to Ron in New Jersey. So she was alive. Sara still doesn't know where the baby is. She doesn't know that the baby's alive. Ron takes the baby to Florida. Very shortly after says, "We're going to Cuba." He said, quote, "As long as I have the child, I can control the situation." So while in Cuba, Ron hires a couple women to take care of the baby. They kept her in a crib with wire over top because they, I guess, were worried about someone stealing her in the night. While in Cuba, Ron was writing Science of Survival, which is another Scientology book. And he dedicated that book to baby Alexis. For 6 weeks, Sara searched for Alexis in Southern California. She enlisted police, she called the sheriff, she called the FBI, but the authorities regarded this as a domestic dispute. Pissed me off. Sara, knowing that Ron really cared about his image in the media, she files a writ of habeas corpus, which is a fundamental legal procedure that allows individuals who are unlawfully detained or imprisoned to challenge their confinement, and she demanded Alexis's return, which the press ate up. They said, oh my God, L. Ron Hubbard, this guy, this New York Times bestseller, has stolen their child. Where's the baby? In 1951, Sara files for divorce, which continues this media uproar because people then found out, oh, he was married twice. Sara accused Ron of subjecting her to sleep deprivation, to beatings, strangulation, and scientific torture experiments. She said she consulted medical professionals who said that Ron was hopelessly insane and crazy. And she received a letter of support from Polly, Ron's first wife, which is like, man, that's such girl code. Polly said, and I quote, "Ron is not normal. I'd hope that you could straighten him out. Your charges probably sound fantastic to the average person, but I've been through it. The beatings, threats on my life, all the sadistic traits you charge, 12 years of it. Please do believe I do so want to help you get Alexis." So heartbreaking. Now, I know I mentioned while in Cuba, while having abducted baby Alexis, Ron wrote The Science of Survival. Quick crash course on Science of Survival. This is the 4th Scientology book, meaning they have an order in which they want you to read L. Ron Hubbard's books. This would be the 4th. And in this book, Ron discusses what he calls the tone scale. This is basically his system of classifying emotional states. At 0, you're dead. At 1.1, you're a pervert. He says below level 2, these lower tones are characterized by psychosis, hatred, anger, perversion, artful lying, cowardice, withdrawal, apathy. Anyone below 2 will bring death or injury to a person's, things, and organizations around them if in the anger bracket, or death to themselves in the apathy bracket. Anyone below level 2 is a potential suicide. Their bodies stink, as does their breath. Someone at 1.5, they are rapists and pedophiles. 2.5, there's some sort of break point between normal and neurotic. Vagueness, indifference, pointless conversation. At level 3, you're highly normal, characterized by resistance to infections, tolerance, and reasonability. However, he is also insincere, careless, and untrustworthy. At level 4, you're clear. These people are characterized by being nearly accident-proof, immune to bacteria, rageous, responsible, and impossible to hypnotize. He estimates that this is only 1/10 of what is in the realm of human potential. This scale goes all the way up to 40, so this isn't like the top. In The Science of Survival, he also created the Chart of Human Evolution, which is a tool designed to plot a person's position on the tone scale. This book also introduced theta and MEST theory. So this book introduced the idea of thetan, which I mentioned before, which is the spirit or the soul, and MEST, which is matter, energy, space, and time. So the theory is that the thetan usually lives in or near a body, but also can be entirely separate from it. The mind functions as a communication and control system for the thetan, helping him operate his environment. The body is merely the physical composition of the person existing in time and space. Back to the timeline, we're still in 1951. Hubbard, after having Sara file for divorce and habeas corpus, Hubbard tells Sara where baby Alexis is in a note. He concludes, at the end of his note, in the event of his death, Alexis will inherit a fortune, but if Sara gains custody, the child will get nothing. He also returned to the United States. This was during the time of the Red Scare, and Ron accused Sara of being a communist. Sara played along with this, basically saying communists had hypnotized her. She could only break free of their powers if they divorced. Ron said, okay, we'll divorce, but I'm gonna accuse you of desertion so I look better in the public eye. And Sara agreed to this as long as she got baby Alexis back. On the day of the divorce, Ron was convinced that the spell the communists had cast over Sara would be broken and she would come back to him. When they walked out of the courtroom, Sara told him that she had to get their daughter. Ron took her to the place where Alexis was being held. Ron drove Sara and Alexis to the airport. We got halfway there, and he said he wasn't going to do it, Sara recalled. I left all Alexis's clothes in the car, left my suitcase, one of Alexis's shoes fell off, and I had my purse. I ran across the airfield, across the runways, to the airport, and got on the plane. It was the 19th of June, and it was the happiest day of my life. During that same year, the foundation that Ron created to train auditors went bankrupt. Now, why didn't his plan of Dianetics work the first time? Because his followers could audit themselves or audit each other, there was no way for him to make money after they bought the initial book. It was like a one and done. It's not like a subscription service. Following his bankruptcy, Ron's close supporters basically deserted him. He got a house trailer, moved to Kansas, parked on his buddy's land. He drank a lot, was asking his buddy to get him weed. In the same year, Ron learns about the e-meter. This is a tool that already existed. This was built in the 1940s by Volney Matthiessen, and he revealed this e-meter, this mechanism, to his followers and said, this is now how we're going to do audits. So what exactly is an e-meter? E-meter stands for electropsychometer. A person being audited holds 2 tin cans or metal cylinders in their hands. Those cylinders are connected to a meter by wires, and the meter shows changes in electrical resistance in your skin in response to thoughts or emotions or speaking about a certain topic. It's very similar to a galvanic skin response monitor, or GSR, which is used for polygraphs or lie detectors. This also measures changes not only in the electrical resistance, but also changes in your sweat glands. In 1951, Ron hosts a series of lectures explaining how people are going to use the e-meter, but he also explains that any new ideas or discoveries are only to be made by him regarding Scientology, his new movement. To explain how the e-meter is used in auditing, the auditor, instead of looking at a person's physical or emotional responses, he looks at the meter instead, and the meter will spike and change, and certain ways that the meter moves tells the auditor something, according to Ron. He begins to circulate in his mailing list of people who bought his book new ideas that are coming out from him, new teachings on reincarnation, past lives, and saying that all this new information could only come from him meant that they would have to purchase that information from him. He realized that if he used these e-meters, that if someone had to come to a person who was trained in an e-meter, they would have to pay to get the auditing service done. In 1952, Ron meets a woman named Mary Sue, and they're just dating at this moment, but they move to Arizona, where they begin the first association of Scientologists. He was between a couple different names, but he landed on Scientology using some Greek and Latin words. The Latin word "scio" means to know, and the Greek word logos means thought or reason. So to know, thought, or reason is Scientology. And I forgot to mention earlier, but Dianetics was named Dianetics because Dia means through in Greek, and nous means soul, so through the soul. A couple other names that Ron almost named the church were the Church of American Science and the Church of Spiritual Engineering. In September of this year, Mary Sue and Ron have their first child, Diana Meredith DeWolf, and the following month, October, they get married. Probably was a shotgun wedding, but they were married until Ron's death for the next 33 years. And just to give an idea of what Mary Sue was like, she was a Southern woman, Southern accent, born in Texas. She's been described as a true believer and a natural enforcer, and one of Hubbard's executives described her as pragmatic, cold, cunning, calculating, efficient, and fiercely loyal. In the summer of this year, before they got married, before they had a child, L. Ron's first son, L. Ron Jr., tried to find his dad and found him in Arizona and said, I want to get to know you. And Ron said, I'm making this new movement. It's called Scientology. If you want to join. And L. Ron Jr. said, I'm in. That fall, Ron and Mary Sue, after having a child and getting married, decided to move away. They moved to Europe, leaving his son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., aka Nibs, his nickname is Nibs, in Arizona. I feel like it's such a shame, you know, his first son wants to spend time with him and then he immediately moves. And Nibs, trying to be the good son that he was trying to be, stayed in Arizona and became a professor at the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, trying to help lead the group while his father was gone. In 1954, they had another child, Jeffrey Quentin Macaulay. This is said to be Mary Sue's favorite child. In February of 1955, they had another daughter, Mary Suzette Rochelle. In 1956, Scientology was doing pretty well. Ron was awarding himself a salary of $500 a month, which adjusted for inflation is about $6,000 a month today. Later that year, he added an additional $125 a week to his salary, which is about double of what he was making before. So he was making $12,000 a month, adjusted for inflation. By 1957, Ron was earning 10% of gross profits from Scientology, which was $250,000 a year annually. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $2.87 million per year. And on top of that, that same year, they received tax exemption status due to them being a religious organization. This same year, Ron published a book called All About Radiation, where he identified himself as a nuclear physicist, and he was promoting a formula called Dianazene. Dianazene, as Ron described it, was a mixture of nicotinic acid, which is niacin, aka vitamin B3, iron, vitamin C. He said that this mixture was supposed to cure cancer, but also sunburns. And he said, quote, "It should be taken daily with milk and chocolate." Dianazene was first manufactured in 1956, but shortly after, in 1957, the Distribution Center Incorporated started manufacturing these specifically for the Church of Scientology. Now, there were no scientific research studies done proving that Dianazene could cure cancer, so the FDA was pretty upset, and in 1958, they halted the production and manufacturing of Dianazene. The FDA raided this warehouse that contained Dianazene, and they destroyed 21,000 tablets. This was due to their false medical labeling. This same year, Mary Sue and Ron's second son, Arthur Ronald Conway, was born. The children did have a nanny, but they were largely unsupervised. And school was not really required of them. It was sort of an afterthought. And that's because Hubbard didn't really believe in public education. It wasn't until Diana, the oldest, asked to learn how to write that they received any education. And even after they had a tutor, Diana was the one that taught Mary Suzette to write. It is suspected that the children did ask about Scientology pretty early on. It's unknown whether they were practicing it at home. In 1959, Hubbard is doing extremely well financially, so he moves his family to England to live in a luxurious estate where he has a full house staff. He's got 2 maids, a nanny, a tutor, a chauffeur, a housekeeper. In 1963, U.S. Marshals raided the Washington Scientology Church. That is because the FDA figured out that Scientologists were labeling these e-meters as an effective diagnosis and treatment of all mental and nervous disorders and illnesses, as well as psychosomatic ailments of mankind such as arthritis, cancer, stomach ulcers, and radiation burns from atomic bombs, polio, the common cold, etc. During the raid, the FDA seized over 100 e-meters, and Scientologists were unable to use them until 1971. A federal judge ruled that the machines could not be used or sold for secular or medical purposes. However, he allowed these e-meters to be returned and used strictly for, quote, bona fide religious counseling. And any devices used after that ruling had to be labeled, "The e-meter is not medically or scientifically useful for the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of any disease. It is not medically or scientifically capable of improving the health or bodily functions of anyone." In 1965, the IRS is getting a little suspicious of Scientologists, so they decide to do an audit on their religious tax exemption status. And this same year, Australia, in certain states, decided to ban Scientology. A lot of tension was rising between governments and Scientologists. In 1966, when this IRS audit is still happening, L. Ron resigned as the executive director of the Church of Scientology, but he still maintained control of the organization. In 1967, the IRS stripped Scientology of its religious tax exemption status. In the summer of this year, Hubbard was becoming increasingly concerned about the government's eyes on Scientology, so he was trying to figure out, how can I keep doing what I'm doing and not be watched by the government? And this is about where I'm going to end the video, because this is when he starts the Sea Org. In August of 1967 is when L. Ron creates the Sea Organization, or the Sea Org, which was an organization of the top members. These members would sign billion-year contracts stating that they're going to continue being Scientologists and serving L. Ron Hubbard for the next billion years, and they were required to be on a ship in international waters. Because if you're in international waters, whose jurisdiction is it? I don't know. In my next video, we'll talk about Sea Org, we'll talk about the other beliefs of Scientology, we'll talk about the experience of what's it like being a Scientologist and going clear, what's the experience of going up the bridge to total freedom. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions or any additional information you think would add to this story, please comment down below. Remember that Scientologists aren't bad people. I'm just talking about L. Ron Hubbard's life, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!